Hey, Stefan, can you hear me okay?
I can hear you just fine. How you doing?
Uh, Pretty good. I mean, other than being a little sick here, I apologize. I caught something funky a few days ago.
Oh no,
Um,
no problem at all. We've all been there. I've given speeches with half my brain pouring out my sinuses, so no sweat.
Excellent. Well, I'm very honored that you invited me on I guess you're really interested what grad school is like in philosophy now.
Sure, I'd love to hear.
Yeah. Are we beginning?
Yes, it's a public call, of course, so just stay off names and places, and we're good to go.
Okay. Yeah, I'm currently in my second year of grad school of philosophy. Um, uh, I guess we can start with the general format of grad school. I'm sure you took a history grad school, which was a seminar format, correct?
Yeah, it was mostly classes, a lot of reading, and some group projects and that kind of stuff, and then a final thesis that went on and on and on, as you know. So go ahead.
Right. Yeah, I would say philosophy is really similar in that regard. So most of the courses have been like in a roundtable seminar format where each week we are assigned readings and we study that and we go to class. A professor usually will give a brief lecture, and then there'll be open discussion. Now, it really depends on how the professor approaches this. Like I've had one seminar course where it's more of like a typical class format where the professor's standing up in front of everyone, primarily lecturing, and then there would be people assigned to give like a 60-minute speech about the readings. That format's a little bit different than everyone kind of just chiming in a seminar format, but um, that's primarily what the actual class format is like. It really depends on the professor's approach for the workload. Like there could be a weekly write up, or there could be a midterm paper, a final paper, or a different kind of project. Uh, I guess a lot of philosophy students, they want to be educators, so there's a lot of emphasis on that with pedagogy, teaching, and so like you might have to create some modules to teach undergrads or something like that. But I would say I've taken a couple of electives in the history department, and history is certainly a lot more reading than philosophy. I would say the average weekly reading for a history seminar in grad school is about 300 pages. In philosophy, it's about 100 to 150 pages.
Yeah, I
Um,
remember taking a full year course on Aristotle, and we spent about a week and a half on a paragraph. It can really, it can really dig deep.
yeah, that's certainly possible. Martin Heidegger, I believe, taught an entire philosophy course on just the first sentence of the Republic. Going down uh, the the little port city. I forget the name of the city, but he kept reinterpreting what that first line in the Republic meant. But fortunately, it's been more general in my studies, at least, where we'll plow through a few major works of philosophy. Like I took a social and political philosophy last semester, and we hit the main marks there. We did Plato's Republic in its entirety. We did John Locke's Second Treatise. Then we did Hannah Arendt's The Human Condition, and we are able to go through all of those pretty thoroughly. So I was really grateful for that. But getting into like the contrast between philosophy and history, history, I feel it's a lot more reading and it's a lot more writing too. So history papers at the grad level are about 30 pages, whereas philosophy papers, they range from 15 to 20 pages. So I'm very I'm not doing a thesis as a master's student. I'm just going to do a capstone. Um, so I figured
I'm
that
sorry,
I'll
a
get it.
what? A capstone? Well, I'm not sure what that is.
Oh, it's in your final semester, they'll assign specific readings that kind of go over your experience what you've been studying in philosophy. And it's a 3 credit course, and essentially I believe you have to write a paper. There's tests, and various factors that go into that, but uh, that you can do that um, instead of a thesis. And from what I've heard from some professors, a master's thesis nowadays is kind of frowned upon. Like there's no like real weight to master theses compared to the PhD level. So
Well, I
um,
mean, they want to keep people in the system, right? So of course they're going to downgrade. I mean, I think my master's was about 110 pages, if I remember rightly, or something like that.
yeah,
But I took on huge topics, so that's a
I
different
think
matter.
it's
But
about that in philosophy as well. Because I was asking questions because I originally I wanted to do a thesis, but I was talked out of it. 'Cause I'm really into Schopenhauer, and I was kind of correlating a lot of different things. Like the how he was influenced by Eastern philosophy, and that's what I did with my entrance paper. I wrote about the Eastern supplements in the world as will and representation, and that got me accepted into grad school. But I wanted to take that further and turn it into a master's thesis, but I was talked out of it. Honestly, with the like I'm doing a full load this semester. I if I had to work on a thesis on top of that, I'd probably go insane because barely have enough time to, you know, especially of taking, the history because every week we're doing so much reading, and I'm doing actually an art of war class. So we started with Sun Tzu and we contrasted that with Mao's guerrilla warfare. Then we did Clausewitz, Karl von Clausewitz. You've heard of him, the Prussian general. I love that because there's actually philosophy. I know there's philosophy in the art of war and all that, but Clausewitz he really tapped into some Kant. Um, I I know he kind of works in like the Hegelian dialectic a little bit. While I didn't really pinpoint that as much as also Plato. He worked in Plato's tripartite soul with his Trinity of warfare. So I really enjoyed that in the Clausewitz. But that was a huge tome I had to read a couple of weeks ago, and I'm taking 2 philosophy courses on top of that. I'm taking German idealism and existentialism. So just the sheer amount of reading, like if I had to do a master's thesis on top of that, I'd go insane. I'd just be strapped to my desk 24/7. But
yeah, I remember I had to do an unholy amount of reading for my master's thesis because I was doing, I was doing Plato, Locke, Kant, and Hegel. And anyway, I won't sort of get into the whole thesis thing here, but I was like, I had my own little corner of the library with my own little cubby, and I could leave the books there, and it was like my area, my little démence. And I found out it was about a week after I'd handed in my thesis that the CD-ROMs with searchable indexes came out for looking up these things because I had to go old-fashioned, right? Um, I had to go to the indexes of the books and look up the topics that I wanted and make sure I got them in context and so on. And then the searchable CD-ROMs came out about a week after I handed in my thesis. So I guess it taught me well, but it would have been a whole lot easier the other way. So yeah, the simply having searchable text is really a huge benefit.
oh, certainly. And I know in history, just from the electives I've taken, that they like you having a lot of sources to cite from. So philosophy may, be required to have like 5 to 10 sources. History, they require a whole lot more. So I just bought 15 because I plan to do my final paper on. It's kind of like blending anthropology with history, just the kind of cultural influences that influenced the war fighters during World War II, and like how the Japanese were influenced by the samurai ideals and all that. So I just ordered a whole bunch of books for that. It was like 15 bucks, and the professor just gave me the green light for that. But I know if it was under 15, he probably would have recommended me, searching for more sources. So yeah, history they definitely need a lot of sources for that, just from my experience.
Well, but
Um,
mine was actually more about, I mean, it was more about philosophical concepts that I was arguing. My basic argument was that the philosophers who believe strongly in a higher realm, the noumenal realm, the realm of forms, and so on, inevitably end up having to advocate for dictatorship as their ideal political model, whereas the more rational empiricists end up with limited government. And that was sort of the general. And I had to sort of go through and find all of the sources and prove all of that. And the argumentation was quite tricky. And so it wasn't so much in history, it was directly in philosophy. And yeah, searchable indexes would have been a big plus. All right. So are you in your 20s or 30s or?
Oh, I just turned 40, so I'm a late bloomer where it comes to philosophy. I was in the military, I was in the Air Force.
Yeah, you
So
sound
that's why
older, but I wasn't sure if it was a cold or not.
it's both.
Yeah, yeah.
um, but I was in the Air Force, and then after I got out, I did the white collar job stuff, and then uh, I got my bachelor's in business. And the entire time I was doing my bachelor's, I was, of course, wanting to do philosophy. So I realized, like in Texas, if you're a Texas veteran, you have what's called the Hazelwood Act. So I can go to any public university and do courses for free. So that's what I'm doing, philosophy. So I'm not actually spending money on the courses. Now I do have to pay the school fees and
Yeah, yeah.
all that, but no, I'm a late bloomer. Like I'm really unsure what I want to do after this. Like something I've always wanted to be more well-rounded in is philosophy, because you can learn, so much on your own. But having that friction between you and the professor is really important, just to kind of smooth out your rough edges and all that. Like you're mentioning the noumenal realm, uh, and something that I always interpreted with Kant is that the thing in itself was like there was a thingness to it, but the thing in itself for Kant is just an epistemic boundary. It's just you have the limit of what is knowable. Sorry, I'm having a pop up come up here, but do you still hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, yeah, Teams pop up real quick, but uh, there's something that was really like illuminating when I came in. So right now I'm doing a one-on-one course with the professor in German idealism, and we're doing it at breakneck speed. So really fortunate to have this. And by the way, the Critique of Pure Reason, that is the most difficult text I have ever read. But it's great to actually sit down and, pound it out and, flesh out, exactly what Kant is saying there, especially the two different editions, the A edition and the B edition, and the differences between those. But with I was totally, because I got into Kant through Schopenhauer, so I was learning all this Kantian terminology to understand Schopenhauer better. And Schopenhauer, for the thing in itself, there is a thingness to it. It's will. Will is the thing in itself for Schopenhauer, but and I kind of interpreted like there was a thingness to the thing in itself for Kant. But no, it's epistemic boundary. It's the limitation of our knowledge. It's not an actual thing. So, that in itself is wonderful that I'm able to be corrected in that instance and be better at philosophy. So but I understand what you're saying about the higher realm. Like a lot of people interpret Plato's forms, especially like he has the different levels, like the noble lie with the bronze souls, the silver souls, and the gold souls, and he kind of places aristocracy above democracy, and he frowns upon democracy and all that. And a lot of people interpret that as could lead to authoritarianism. But my interpretation of Plato's Republic, yes, there's the political side of it, but there's also like a psychological side. Like, is the whole thing is about harmony, and that's expressed throughout the Republic. But did I answer your question?
Yeah, I mean, of course, with Plato, he watched his mentor and beloved father figure get voted to take hemlock. So I can see why he'd be a little bit leery of democracy as a whole. And of course, when he tried to get into politics, he ended up being sold into slavery and was only redeemed by a fortunate student who came by who bought him for a song and a dance. So, I mean, yeah, there are definitely personal experiences with Plato that would lead him that way. But yeah, totalitarianism does seem to be the case when you believe in a higher realm that's inaccessible to the general senses, because then you need to be part of a mystery religion to make good decisions in society. And most people aren't. So they just have to be told what to do, which is why I think the noble lie comes in.
Yeah, yeah, and then we have our own kind of noble lie here in America. where this is the American dream where you can go out and be successful at anything, which is obviously a fucking lie. But that's kind of what it's presented as when you're in school. It's like you can become the president, or you can become a doctor or astronaut. It's all bullshit. But yeah, we kind of have our noble lie here in the US. So that in itself hasn't gone away. The having that, civilizational or societal type of noble lie just to kind of have like this idealistic view of the nation that you live in.
Well, I mean,
But
I wouldn't say that the noble lie, it's not particular to America, is you can go out and be anything you want. What they're saying is that, the pursuit of happiness, not the guarantee of happiness. So there's no legal barriers to have you go out and stop trying to, and try. And there's no legal barriers to stop you going out and try and become a captain of industry or something like that. That doesn't mean that everyone can do it. Like there's no law that says I can't go and be a ballet dancer. I just I won't be a ballet dancer or an opera singer or something like that. But I think one of the big lies in the West is that we vote, and because we vote in our politicians, they listen to what we do, and therefore we have to obey them because the majority has gotten what they want. And I had Dr. Brian Kaplan on my show many years ago, The Myth of the Rational Voter. And also there's been, countless studies that what the people actually want and what they vote for has almost no correlation to what the government actually does. So I think the noble lie is, well, hey, man, you voted for this, so you have to obey it. And it's like, but there's almost no correlation between what the voters express that they want and what the politicians actually do. I mean, heaven's sakes, didn't the Trump voters want the Epstein files released and all of that kind of stuff? So there's sort of not much correlation and barely any, but I think the noble lie is, and it's a very convenient lie for those in power. Like we give you a vote, which legitimizes the political process, and then you have to obey us because, hey man, we gave you the vote. And now, but if they just do whatever they want, regardless of the vote to a large degree, with Trump being, I think, an outlier in that area as a whole, but it's a very convenient way to get people to obey you, to pretend that they're participating in your decisions.
yeah, certainly, I certainly agree with that. As George Washington warned us about political parties forming, so it's more about what those parties want to do than the actual, will of the people voting for those parties. So, like there's the promised wall that Trump would do, and that got him, his first presidency.
Yeah.
And where is it? Where's the wall? So, but it seems like he's cracking down more on illegal immigration now. So at least there's that. But I remember like Ann Coulter was really, pushing for Trump and a strong voice there. And she was super pissed off when that wall wasn't built. But yeah, I definitely see that as a kind of noble lie. Representative democracy. So yeah, it goes back to George Washington with the political parties, ruling more than the actual will of the people.
Yeah, or the
But
idea that the government is interested in teaching you how to think. It's we got to have kids, got to educate them, got to put them in these government schools for 12 years straight, where they emerge with no capacity to think, very few math skills, few writing skills, and absolutely zero economically valuable skills at all. I mean, it's just a holding pen to release
oh
the
yeah,
parents to go to work so that they can pay more taxes and to program the children into leftist gobbledygook nonsense. But yeah, so this idea that government education is anything other than programming people to obey the government and be dependent is, it's the old saying, like if you send your children to be educated by Caesar, don't be shocked when they come back as Romans.
oh certainly. Even in higher education, when I took microeconomics and macroeconomics, it was just a whole bunch of memory work and memorize all these different terms, and that's it. And after the course is done, you brain fart all that. It's all gone right after the course is over. You don't really retain much. There's a lot of courses like that in business. I have met people with MBAs that can't even spell. Like it's ridiculous. But I would say philosophy is a little bit different in that regard. Like you do get confronted by the professors. They will grill you when you are wrong about something.
Yeah, I
And
just I just had a professor try and do that with me on Wednesday.
I no, I listened to that, and John or whatever his name is, it, it's not an example of what I've experienced at grad school with
No,
the
but I
professor.
really sorry, but I really appreciated him calling in. I really did. I mean, I enjoyed the conversation. I'm very glad that it happened because, for better or for worse, I have a big voice in the world of modern philosophy. I've had like almost a billion views and downloads. So I have a big voice. And it's always sort of surprised me that more professors of philosophy aren't calling in to set me straight, to help me think better, to communicate their great skills to an audience. Because, I mean, certainly in my heyday, a professor might teach, a couple of thousand people over his whole career, but a professor who called in and had a debate or a conversation with me could reach like a million people. And I guess it was all surprising to me that more philosophy professors didn't call in and say, here's what I think you got right, here's where I think you could improve, and, give a sort of public lecture because they care about philosophy. And I have a big voice and a big audience. And I was just kind of surprised. And then I thought, well, maybe it's because reputational damage, but then, of course, I thought, well, I mean, everybody who studies the history of philosophy knows for absolute certain that philosophers suffer reputational damage if they're good. If they're bad, nobody cares, right? But if they're good, and we won't go through the whole list, but everybody knows the number of philosophers who've been attacked and slandered and lied about and maligned. That's just the gig. That's the deal. And so I thought, well, it can't be because of reputational damage because they are fully aware that good philosophers, and by good, I don't necessarily mean right or correct in every instance, obviously, but I mean like has some influence on the world, has some significant influence on the world. And yeah, I was just kind of surprised that none of them said, gee, and I'm going to, because they only have philosophers to study because people in the past took risks. And yet philosophy professors don't seem to want to come on my show. Maybe it's too risky, in which case it's like, well, then you're just studying men more courageous than you are, which seems not ideal.
Yeah, that kind of goes back to Plato and the Republic. Like philosophers in a democracy are delegated to the fringes in a democracy. So for Plato,
Well, no, but they
well,
don't have to be on the fringes. They could just call in, and if they were worried about reputational damage, we could just use a voice changer. I mean, that's not the end of the world. They could put on a Scottish accent for all I care, right? But
right. I was a little concerned about that too because obviously in the humanities it's quite left leaning. And there's a lot of people who are really passionate about their political beliefs.
oh yeah, we saw
And
that last week.
so I was a little concerned in that regard, but as long as we speak generally, I think we're okay.
Well, and
Not to name.
of course, you're welcome to say, as everyone does, well, I don't agree with everything Steph says. I mean, and I'm sure you don't. And if it's any consolation, neither do I, because I've been doing this for 43 years and I've changed my opinion on, not my opinion. I hopefully improved my arguments on a wide variety of topics. So
Oh
you and
yeah,
I wouldn't see
certainly.
eye to eye on everything for sure. But so tell me a little bit. I mean, how is the philosophy departments that you've been exposed to, are they leftist too? Like I can see that in, I don't know, the education department or the social sciences or whatever, but the sort of rigorous logic stuff, I'm not sure that skews specifically political. So what has your experience been of sort of political bias or perspectives
Yes,
in?
I mean, just like the humanities as a whole, and I think it's just universal, not just to the U.S. but Europe as well. Philosophy is certainly left leaning. Um, with the faculty and all that. Now, um, I've had some very left leaning professors, but they still knew their shit. So I was still very valuable. The, the courses are still very valuable, but occasionally there'll be a contemporary political, conversation, and they might try to work in, what the material that we're reading and interpreting that through a modern lens. But no, there's certainly a in philosophy, there's certainly a left leaning um, skewering there.
Now, is that
Which
because, is that just taken for granted, or do they make the case and they say, we're about rigorous logic from first principles, and that just leads you to the left, and here's how and here's why? Or is it just accepted as that's the good?
a lot of the people, in the the humanities in general, they want to be educators, and those types typically are a little bit more on the progressive side. Now, I'm not saying that's 100% universal. Certainly there's right wing professors. Like when I was an undergrad, I went to a private Baptist university, and that was primarily right wing professors and libertarians. But I'm in a public university setting now, and it's like the complete opposite. So,
Yeah, you
um,
can't, whoever pays the piper calls the tune, right? You can't do much to criticize the state if the state pays and protects your job.
yeah. So it's something that it was eye opening to begin with, and I did clash a few times with other individuals, but mainly I don't stick to politics at all at school. I'm there to learn about the material. So
But do the
yeah,
professors ever talk about that conflict of interest? Because if in the medical field and in other fields, but in primarily the medical field, if you're paid by Pfizer, then you're supposed to disclose that, because that's a potential conflict of interest, so that people are aware that you have a financial conflict of interest. And of course, philosophy is fundamentally, to me at least, fundamentally is about ethics. And so, do professors say, here's my political perspectives, but remember, I'm paid by the state, so I may not be fully objective, and I'm certainly willing to have my arguments attacked and overturned, but I have enough self-knowledge because, of course, Socrates says the unexamined life is not worth living, and you know thyself, and so on. And so I have enough self-knowledge to know, because I love Socrates, that I have a conflict of interest being protected and paid by the state. And so here's my political perspectives, but be aware of this potential conflict of interest, because that's what's required in other fields where you have to reveal your source of income so that people can take that into account when evaluating your perspective.
so obviously here in Texas we've had that DEI ban. And I'll just say this: I feel like I could get into a little bit of trouble by expounding, the detailings of your question. But when the DEI ban happened in Texas, like my university had a DEI office, and there was a lot of backlash to that. Like a lot of people were really upset, including people in my department, and passions were really high. Um, so yeah, there, it's
Well, I'm sorry, I'm not talking about DEI specifically at all. I'm talking about if you're going to evaluate the state, but you are paid by the state, and not only are you paid by the state, but your entire job is fenced in and protected by state edicts and state power, would that not be something to talk about, right?
yeah, certainly, and there's uh, um,
It doesn't matter
it's a
whether you're
tough question.
DEI hire or not. You're still paid and protected by the state. And it would seem to me that that would be something to discuss. Like if I had a particular, let's say, company XYZ, if corporation XYZ was paying all my bills and I was talking about corporation XYZ, it would be unethical for me to not disclose that I was being paid by XYZ. Like if you're in the financial reporting industry or you write financial articles, if you write about a company and you hold stock in that company, you kind of have to tell people, right? And so that sort of basic ethics of disclosing conflicts of interest, I guess that would be something that I would expect philosophy professors to do when talking about politics, saying, well, I am talking about politics, but remember, I'm paid by the state. So take that into account when you're evaluating my position. I'm paid and protected by the state. I get summers off, 4 months off in the summer because of the government. I get my sabbaticals every couple of years where I get to go and write and read on the taxpayer's dime, and nobody can come and compete for my position because the government or the contracts enforced by the government require a PhD. So that to me would just be sort of basic disclosure of conflict, a potential conflict of interest. And I'm just wondering if anyone's done anything like that.
No, no.
Wild.
I mean, it's pretty much assumed that they're all paid by the state and all that, but um, yeah, it's something that it's not really expound upon.
And I guess people aren't, I mean, I know that everyone knows that they're paid by the state, but it should, certainly for undergrads, it would be important to remind people who may not have been exposed to that kind of thing. And I suppose if an undergraduate were to stick his hand up or her hand up and say, hey, but you're paid and protected by the state, do you think that has any influence on your view of government? I mean, would there not be a rather chilly silence in the in the room in that situation?
Exactly, yeah, especially when they're criticizing you know the state, but the state allows them to voice their political opinions. Yeah, there is kind of a catch-22 there. But yeah, it's not something I've really experienced. I understand that obviously, with a lot of left-leaning sentiments, it's more about you know the passion that they have, and a lot of that sentiments comes out to disagreeing with the current administration and all that. But this semester, there's not much of that happening. It's all just been about philosophy. I understand there's a lot of stuff happening on campuses about Charlie Kirk being assassinated. And one of my professors said, we're not mentioning that at all. Like, we're just going to stick to the material that we're covering. And
Sorry, so
that's
you had
that.
a professor who explicitly said, although a truly groundbreaking and horrifying political assassination occurred because of philosophy, because of moral ideas and arguments, the philosophy professor said, we are not going to talk about that.
Well, he was cautioning us because, obviously students have been getting in trouble and expelled from universities. So it's more of a caution not to go there. And he preferred to just delve into the material that we're covering.
Sorry, I'm sorry.
Certainly,
Just so he wasn't like, this is not going to be part of our course. He was cautioning students to not talk about it, like at all. Like, don't post videos because you might get kicked out of university.
no, I think it was in that specific class that he was teaching, that we're going to be covering the material and uh, not delving into that. But
But
it
that
was
would
more.
be interesting because you were talking about Clausewitz and Mao and Sun Tzu and so on. I mean, they're willing to talk about political violence, political terrorism, and so on, but just not in any contemporary way.
Well, it's because a lot of students have been getting in trouble, and obviously you don't want to end up being on the evening news because of
Sorry,
someone.
and what is the perception about why? I mean, I don't know if he said this, and I appreciate you sharing this, but what is his perspective as to why students are getting in trouble?
Well, obviously people have been mocking Charlie Kirk's death, and that has resulted in a lot of videos going viral. Like Greg Abbott called for the governor of Texas called for one student to be expelled, not at my university, just at a different university. And but I think we're buying a little too much into this. Like I don't I apologize for I'm still recovering from being sick, but he just kind of gave a little warning, like, hey, if we delve into this, could get into some turbulent waters.
But isn't
But
that the job of philosophy, is to get into turbulent waters? I'm sorry if I'm missing that, but I mean, what a fascinating thing to talk about in a philosophy course, which
I,
is
I don't even what's that?
the political assassination and people's responses to it, and where that fits into philosophical concepts and virtues and so on, and partisanship and cognitive dissonance, and it's a fascinating topic. But again, I understand that it could ruffle some feathers, but I
Well,
mean,
also,
they're studying people who ruffled everyone's feathers in the past. But sorry, go ahead.
No, you're certainly correct to point that out. Like philosophy is about, questioning, the state that we live in and the different ideals and how those clash and, what is the the most moral in that regard. But I apologize. I may be putting too much projection onto what the professor said. But it was a very brief passing comment that he said, that he mentioned that people have been getting in trouble at universities for discussing
And
television.
I don't want to push you on this topic, so I recognize the sensitivity of it. So I would just point out that from my standpoint, and we can move on after this, but I would just point out that from my standpoint, for a philosophy professor to say, don't do something because it might get you in trouble, does not seem to me specifically
I think it was
philosophical.
I think it was more about be careful.
Right, right, right.
Because
But be careful. But how about not be careful, but be moral, right? Like, let's look at the ethics of mocking and doing some Korean TikTok dance over somebody getting shot through the neck for expressing peaceful and rational opinions, or at least hopefully rational opinions or arguments. So rather than saying, don't do stuff that will get you in trouble, how about don't do stuff that's kind of cold hearted and immoral? But it might get you in trouble is not a very philosophical argument. That's just rank consequentialism, and that's sort of how you would train a puppy to not go on the rug. But anyway, I get it's a sensitive topic, so I
no,
just think it would be.
I know the professor pretty well. He's also teaching me German idealism 101. And I think it was more of just a warning for other people that may be really passionate and may, go over the boundaries and get themselves in trouble. I think it was more of a warning to them. Again, I may be projecting, I may not be accurately presenting what he said. It was just a really brief passing comment that he made. And I do have utmost respect for this professor. So that was
Yeah,
just
he was giving a caution, and I sort of understand that. Now, what's the sorry, if there's other stuff that you wanted to mention, I have a couple of questions, but I don't want to preempt if there's other topics that you wanted to talk about, and I really appreciate this view into the modern academia.
yeah, certainly. Yeah, feel free to ask anything you want.
So, what would you say the general purpose is? And let me just give you a tiny bit of backstory as to why I asked this. So, I had a professor. Most of my professors really loved what I did, although they disagreed with me quite strongly, which of course turned out to be really great in hindsight because it gave me a chance to sharpen my rhetorical blades, so to speak. But I had a professor who made me rewrite an essay twice, and I was very tempted to ask him, although I chickened out at the time, I was very tempted to ask him, okay, but what's the purpose of history? Because for me, the purpose of history is to learn moral lessons to avoid them in the future. And I guess I never quite understood with that professor, or indeed with most professors, like, what is the larger purpose of history? So for me, the purpose of history is to change the future by learning the lessons of the past, because you can't change the past, but you can use it to, like, the purpose of pain is not about the past, right? You pick up something as a kid, it's too hot, you burn yourself. The purpose of the pain is not about the past, it's about preventing you from doing something in the future. And that to me was why you study history. And I did have some of those conversations with some professors, but this guy kind of gave me the creeps and the willies. And I ended up doing quite well in the course, but that was only because I basically had to just do what he said. And, I was a young kid and all of that. So it took me a while to get more of my moral musculature developed. But in philosophy departments, is there a sense as to the why? Because, that's the fundamental question of philosophy, is the why. And is there a larger sense of purpose or mission? Is the goal, well, we want to get people to think more critically, more rationally. We want to get them to challenge their assumptions. We want to get them to be resistant to propaganda. We want to oppose sophistry and promote Socratic reasoning. Is there a larger mission in any of the sort of philosophy people that you've been around in this arena?
So, for critical thinking, certainly, I think that's where um, the roundtables and the seminars they really flourish with having people discuss the text because you want to do it through a critical lens. And when someone veers off into nonsense land, being corrected, or just having some rough edges that need to be smoothed out. They're given that opportunity. Like last week, I saw one student completely be grilled while presenting a section of Heidegger's Being and Time. And I did not expect that student to be grilled. I thought he was actually doing really well with his presentation. But the professor kept grilling him and grilling him and grilling him. And I see the benefit of that because you're constantly having to delve deeper into the the material that's being covered and really consider it at a deep level, especially when we're getting to Heidegger and all that. But Heidegger itself is something that I'm glad I'm finally getting around to, but it's very complex stuff.
So the grilling, sorry to, and I know, of course, you can't recall it verbatim, I'm sure, but what sort of grilling? Is it more definitions, or is it exposing contradictions in the text or contradictions in the argument? What sort of
yes.
form did that grilling take?
Well, there was Heidegger brings up the word facticity
I'm sorry, what was the word?
and facticity.
Facticity.
And
Okay. Sounds
yes,
like truthiness, but all right. Facticity. Go ahead.
yeah, and the professor asked what the definition of that was, and the student couldn't, give a satisfactory answer. And when the professor kept grilling him about, what does this mean in the context that Heidegger's saying in relation to design, um, and it turns out the professor was actually curious what it meant. Like he didn't know. Like, and so it was a learning experience for everyone. Like the I understand he used that as an opportunity to try to get to what the true meaning of facticity is for Heidegger in that context, which people looked up online what other Heideggerians say it means, but the professor found all of those unsatisfactory. So it was he was using a specific instance of Heidegger that's universally unclear with all the scholars to really, have the student given the presentation consider deeply, the material that's being covered by, certainly bringing something, like facticity that, there's some issues there with interpretation. So I feel like even when there's not a a correct answer to something, but just having that, just the discipline to and the rigor to dig deep into that is beneficial overall. And that's part of philosophy is that critical thinking and trying to reach the best conclusion, the most preferable. Um, so I feel that being very rewarding in philosophy grad school. As well, I understand you were talking about like the historical context. Granted, it's really cool that you were able to do your master's thesis on philosophy in the history department. Um, like whenever I mention, Plato or Kant, and my history electives professor just kind of gives me a weird look. But in the philosophy department, it's like different lingo in different departments. But um, I would say like professors feel like some of them at least, and I'm speaking for all of them, of course, but there's some um, that may view like the current administration or the current, you know, what's happening uh, with the Trump administration being like the downfall of democracy and all that. But um,
And do they invite criticism in a 360? Like when I was in the business world, you have sort of 360 reviews where you don't just give performance reviews to your employees, but your bosses give it to you, your colleagues give it to you, your employees give it to you, so that you can get a sort of 360 review of what you're doing and how to improve. Do the professors say, yes, I think that Trump is the downfall of democracy or something like that? Let's hear the counter arguments. Let's examine this. Let's examine
yes,
even my own perspectives from a critical.
yes, yes. The I have heard professors ask for, if there's any contrary opinions or anything like that, and I've had some professors wish students would speak up and present contrary opinions. Um, but the thing is, like, I've had just personal experience. I've clashed with some individuals, not professors, but some, other students. And I realized it's like, it's very fruitless for me to go down, um, that channel and, voice my authentic opinion about, the current state of the world and where we live in and all that. But yeah, it just gets messy because there's different factions and different students having different views, and the typically the what you we would consider woke, they tend to be the loudest, and they tend to um, be the most dominant voices. Um, so it's really, if I don't know, like I prefer just to me personally just to kind of stick to my own devices and not let that stuff get to me. And
And have you seen if the professor invites a contrary opinion, particularly about current events? Have you seen those conversations go well as a whole, or do they usually go badly, or how does that work?
I would say even if someone has a contrary opinion, in some instances that they realize that it could just turn into you know, I really, uh, so like me personally, and this is just my opinion, not representative at any university or anything like that. Like I've clashed with individuals, and they catch you off guard because it's not one on one argument. It's numerous people. It's like you're poking the wasp nest,
Right.
and um, so I realized early on, like, yeah, let's just not go down that road. I'm gonna get upset, and I'm gonna go home, and I'll be ruminating, and it's not gonna do me any favors. Poking a
Now, is
wasp
this sort of
nest.
in class or in the CAF or?
It's happened more outside of class, um, but there was one instance where a couple individuals spoke up to me for othering, which I really don't know the details and all that, but um, they 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 viewed that I was othering, quote unquote, othering another group of people, and they both really just loudly shut me down, out
Give
of
you a full
nowhere.
old struggle session, right?
Yeah. So that's when I kind of realized, oh, I need to be quiet in this regard. But you know, that's just a small part of grad school. Like you do have the political orientations and all that, but like I still I view like my education is still very valuable. Like I love, like, I have to be very disciplined to get through some very difficult texts and understand what I'm reading, especially of Kant, the first critique. Oh my goodness, that was a behemoth to tackle. And I felt so accomplished from doing that. And every Monday I have 2-hour one-on-one discussions with the professor where we discuss the text, very thoroughly, and he ensures that I'm getting it. I I feel so, it's very wonderful to have that experience and be more well-rounded in that regard, especially uh, a section of philosophy that I'm very interested in and getting a good education there. So I feel like the benefits definitely outweigh the cons of perhaps the you know, ideological side of some of the students. Definitely not all. Like I would say maybe it's 1/4 of the students share that the quote unquote wokeness, and they're very vocal about it. So it's definitely not all of them.
Yeah, and good luck saying if people start talking about white privilege and you say, "I'm sorry, you're othering white people." Yeah, good luck with that, right?
Oh
Apparently,
no, I'd be shut
that's
down
fine.
so fast. Yeah,
Right, right.
yeah, that's a nightmare. It's
Or
nightmare fuel.
anybody who expresses any satisfaction about Charlie Kirk's assassination, or says "good riddance" or "he deserved it" or something, is like you're othering conservatives, you're othering Christians, and it's like, yeah, othering seems to be kind of a one-way street, as
Yeah,
these things tend to be. So, how
definitely.
did you? I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, fortunately, I have personally not heard anything negative in that regard about Charlie Kirk's assassination. So take that as you will. Like people are just not talking about it that much.
But
But
that is negative to not
I
talk
understand
about it
it's
and
negative
say,
because
look,
it's
obviously
very
this was an evil act, and we should talk about it because that is something that is contemporaneous and is the result of a great evil, and we need to trace the roots of the thought that might have ended up with this justification, because we assume that the shooter felt that he was justified. And we have to look at the justifications because justifications open the door to these kinds of evil actions. And to me, I think that would be like, let's trace the threads of what he believed and how he came to believe it. And because this is crime and punishment stuff, right? So the murderer felt that he was justified, and in the same way that Raskolnikov in Crime and Punishment felt that he was justified in murdering the old pawnbroker, and the belief systems that give rise to those justifications, I think, are really important to examine. So not saying anything about it is interesting, because if they could use it to further their own political ends, I'm sure they would say a lot about it. So it's kind of a confession that they can't use it to further their political aims. Therefore, there's no point talking about it at all. But it would be the same if a prominent leftist got shot. It would be fascinating and instructive and hopefully preventive to examine the ideological threads that led to those justifications and figure out what philosophy can do to de-escalate or oppose those ideas.
I certainly agree with you, Mr. Molyneux. Like, I do see it as as a quote unquote turning point um, of this political assassination because it's not just killing a person; it's attacking what that person stood for, their ideas, and that's what philosophy is. It's about testing ideas and understanding where those ideas come from. So I certainly agree with you in that aspect.
Well, and
But
seeing especially the combination of Kirk and Kimmel, right? So seeing all the leftists, protesting, outraged, canceling subscriptions, and so on, because a late night comedian lost his job, but they specifically weren't having the same level of outrage when a young family man got murdered in front of his wife and kids. That's troubling on every conceivable level, and that to me would be a very interesting philosophical discussion to have.
indeed, indeed. Another thing too, this semester I'm not taking, political or social philosophy. So I'm taking existentialism, German idealism, and the art of war. I guess, but the art of war is in the history department. It's not the philosophy department. But that could be another reason why. Like, I would definitely see if this was political and social philosophy, Charlie Kirk, his assassination being discussed in that course. But it could also be, just the type of courses I'm taking this semester. Why there's not a spotlight on that right now. But
Or you could say, we're not going to talk about the Charlie Kirk murder because whatever beliefs led that person to murder Charlie Kirk may be so prevalent that it might be physically dangerous for us to do so, which would be an example of how violence works.
yeah, yeah, certainly that could be a factor as well. There's probably a multitude of reasons why I
I mean,
haven't
do you think if a leftist had been murdered, it would not be discussed as well?
in these specific courses. I don't see a reason why it would be because the content of these courses aren't dealing with social or political philosophy. But
No, but moral philosophy for sure. I mean, most philosophers focus on moral philosophy.
yeah, you're right.
So, like, what would
Certainly right
Kant have
there.
to say about this, or Hegel, or
Categorical imperatives for Kant. And then you have Heidegger, which um, care is very important for the interaction of designs. Like care is very very important. So compassion, even Schopenhauer, which um, he viewed compassion as very important.
Nietzsche's
Yes,
will to power would be interesting to discuss in this context.
yeah, yeah. A political will to power happening right
Uh-huh.
now. But yeah, there's certainly a lot of different ways you can look at it. And I kind of do wish that, I was in political philosophy right now where we had that discussion. Um, I think it might be illuminating.
Well,
You
again,
know,
I would argue that it would be more relevant to moral philosophy than political philosophy. Because what he did certainly was politically motivated, in my opinion, but it is the question of when, just war theory, when is violence, justified self-defense theory, and so on. If the shooter believed that Charlie Kirk was advocating for the murder of himself or people that he liked, this is the old, do you go back and kill Hitler when he's little? That argument, right? When is preemptive violence acceptable? When is, you don't have to wait for the guy to cut off your arm with a chainsaw to use self-defense. If he's just running at you, he hasn't harmed you yet, but he's going to. Can words, what's the relationship between words and violence? I mean, there's a lot to talk about philosophically from this kind of stuff, but
no, you're right. You're very right. There's
I
a
also get it's volatile and could be challenging. And it also might reveal a certain bloodthirstiness, because I think that's what's come out of the left
yeah, yeah.
over the
I agree
last
there
week is a
too.
certain kind of bloodthirstiness. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I certainly agree. They want blood. It was very apparent. So yeah. So next question. You said you had another question.
Oh, yeah. So how did you get into philosophy, your interest in philosophy as a whole?
Oh, that's a great question. Thank you very much for asking that. So my father, he was part of the Theosophical Society. So he exposed me to what they interpret as philosophy, quote unquote, which is a mishmash of a lot of different practices, a lot of it being Eastern and all that. And so I had always heard the word philosophy and kind of, as a child, I correlated it to more of esotericism. However, it's actually through music that I got into traditional philosophy. I was really into heavy metal and extreme metal, as well as classical music. And there's a lot of Nietzschean themes in metal. And so I started reading Nietzsche. When I was in the Air Force, I had The Will to Power, Thus Spoke Zarathustra, and read those while I was in Japan, while I was stationed there. But it was all metal. And there's, in classical music too, there's a lot of Nietzsche references, and, there's Mahler and Strauss. Um, so got into Nietzsche, and started working my way backwards from Nietzsche. Um, Eventually landed on, Schopenhauer, and it just really resonated with me on a lot of different levels. Because at that point in time, I had delved into some Eastern philosophies, especially Advaita Vedanta, which really spoke to me, non-dualism. And here's a Western philosopher who's addressing, of course, Schopenhauer, his knowledge of Hinduism and Buddhism, it was just now being presented in Europe. Like, there wasn't a lot of information on it when Schopenhauer was getting into it. So it's kind of at the forefront of that. And a lot of what he said may not be 100% correct just because it was in this nascent stage there in Europe while he was writing about it. But getting into Schopenhauer just blew my world, especially when I got into his aesthetics and music. And I would say, um, I've always kind of viewed philosophy as, I know the definition of it, a lot of people say is the love of wisdom, but for me, it's illumination. And illumination can take forms outside of traditional philosophy. It could take form in music, take form in the arts, it could take form in whatever that broadens or expands our minds and understanding. I would say is philosophy. Um, and Schopenhauer really, really resonated with me and got into him. And then, to understand Schopenhauer, you need to get into Kant. So got into Kant. Now I'm very fortunate to be studying, you know, very formally Kant. Um, Also got into Plato and delved into a little bit of Neoplatonism. I wouldn't say I'm a Neoplatonist, more I like traditional Plato, and some other Platonists. But yeah, of course, just started expanding from there more and more. But I would say initially my interest in philosophy came from my father, but that was more from the esoteric side. And but music is what thrusted me into traditional philosophy, if that answers your question.
It does, yeah. I mean, I think that it sounds to me, and obviously correct me if I'm going astray, it sounds to me like you got more into maybe muscular or manly philosophy out of the metal stuff.
Certainly.
Because the esoteric
Yeah.
stuff, this tentative stuff kind of drives me. Like I had a guy on the show last night who was saying he thinks that two and two make four. And that kind of esoteric stuff is very sort of tentative, very sort of world consciousness, brain, soul uniting stuff. I was always looking for something more practical, Anglo-Saxon, perhaps robust, certain, because if I'm going to build my knowledge base, I want to build it on certainties, not on sort of this mystical, goopy, everyone is everything kind of stuff, which struck me as, I mean, it's pathologically female. It's an extension of female nature to the point of absurdity.
Yeah, you would probably like Schopenhauer, thinking about this. Have you read Schopenhauer?
I've read some Schopenhauer. I've certainly been very curious about, because, of course, most people will talk about Schopenhauer's view of women in the modern context.
Yeah, that's exactly what I
So,
was thinking.
yeah. So tell me a little bit about the stuff that you like about Schopenhauer.
Oh, like I was saying, I like his aesthetics because he gives music metaphysical weight. So there's like a metaphysical aspect of music, and I've experienced something kind of transcendental with music, especially sitting up front at a symphony, like Bruckner's Ninth or Eighth Symphony, and just being transported into a different realm. Uh, Everything about the phenomenal world just disappears, and I'm just focusing straight on the musical forms. But with Nietzsche, well, you brought up the will to power. Um, Nietzsche was really influenced by Schopenhauer's The Will to Survive, which is very Darwinian. But Schopenhauer viewed that there's a metaphysical will embedded in everything, and that kind of correlated to some of the esoteric stuff I was into, like the Advaita Vedanta, the non-dualism, and all that. Like of course, I wasn't really into Christianity because it is dualism or pluralism, depending how you look at it. But
Sorry, you mean
uh,
sort of the mind body stuff?
yeah, yeah.
Hmm.
But Yeah, I felt that Schopenhauer had a more coherent metaphysical system than Nietzsche. It was more fleshed out, and I felt it was more convincing in that regard. Like Nietzsche, there's a lot of commentary. Like, I saw some criticism if Nietzsche would have focused more inwards and got into metaphysics more, that he could have been like one of the main thinkers in that realm. But
Well, and who knows what he might have achieved if he hadn't gone mad, whether he got
yeah,
syphilis from that
exactly.
unfortunate prostitute or not. But yeah, I
Some
mean,
people say it was
Nietzsche
brain
is very
cancer.
thought provoking. He's like he's king of the aphorisms, which really make you think. But he's not a systemic um, concept builder from
Exactly. Yeah.
metaphysics to epistemology to ethics. He's an observationalist and an incredibly keen one, very
Oh
thought
yeah.
provoking, but not a system builder.
Correct. Very correct. But Schopenhauer is all about building systems. So he's in the Kantian tradition. Um, so yeah, that's what I was initially drawn to Schopenhauer, and there's the element of music and aesthetics just reaffirmed his philosophy for me. Now, like a lot of people view Schopenhauer as a pessimist, I feel less epiphenomenal of his observations because he saw like how nature, like there's the element of suffering throughout the world. That's why we should definitely have compassion for each other. But for Schopenhauer, there's just boredom and suffering, just so prevalent in reality, which is a huge parallel to Mahayana Buddhism, which he talks a little bit about. He didn't get that far into Mahayana. He got into the Heart Sutra, which is like a Chinese simplification of uh, the Diamond Sutra, which is all about negation. Like two negations equal, an affirmation essentially is Mahayana Buddhism. And Schopenhauer was really drawn to that too, because there's just he felt like the way you get out of suffering is to kind of transcend, either through being an aesthetic monk or through aesthetics. You know, musical profundity. You temporarily relinquish the will. Um, so yeah, there's a lot of wonderful things in Schopenhauer. I understand, and he even admits this too. That if you're not convinced, there's nothing more I can say. But it's not for everyone. It's not something I could see being applied on a societal level or anything like that. It's very personal. But he does speak broadly about having compassion and all that. So that could be translated into on a societal level, but not the if you view life itself as boredom and suffering, it's like it's not a good foundation to build a society.
No, no,
Um,
I get that. And of course, also Schopenhauer being such a, you know, once in a century kind of genius. I mean, how much is he going to actually have in common with the average person or even the intelligent person or even the highly intelligent person? It's like putting Pavarotti in a choir. He's going to be like, I'm surrounded by people who aren't as good as I am. And I can certainly, you know, one of the things that's challenging with philosophers is if you're really good at it, then you have a distance from the general population.
oh yeah,
And it's easy to interpret your distance from the general population as something existential. Man is doomed to be isolated and bored. And it's like, well, no, that's because you're super smart. And so you're going to have less in common with the average person. But that's not human nature. That's your amazing mind not being able to connect with the average or even the above average around you.
yeah. I mean, he did view like even for the average person, they're always in a constant state of boredom, at least boredom. But but
But
he kind
they
of
also might have been bored by him because they
oh yeah,
couldn't follow what he was saying. So he might be like, everyone I interact with is bored. It's like, that may not be the human condition. That may be like, you always have to be careful about yourself as the observer. Like if I were to say, well, most people are highly aggressive and contentious. It's like, well, yeah, but I go wading in where fools rush in where angels fear to tread. I go wading in with some of the most contentious topics around just because I have a preference for the truth and I really don't care. I mean, if I cared about people getting upset by what I said, I never would have escaped my mother, right? So it's sort of foundational training on that sort of stuff because my mother was very mystical and kind of crazy and I had to pursue reason, even though it upset her mightily. So I had lots of training long before I was in the public square. So if I were to say human nature is to be contentious and angry, it's like, well, no, that's a lot of the reactions in a sense that I wouldn't say I provoke, but that telling the truth provokes in people. So I wouldn't say that's human nature. I would say that's human nature in the proximity of me and detaching how human beings react in the proximity of you and saying what's human nature outside of my interactions with people is one of the big challenges.
yeah. I can see that as well. Like even explaining Schopenhauer to people, they get bored to death. Even if you put it in simplistic terms, the average person has zero interest in Schopenhauer. Like I have a shower curtain with Schopenhauer's face on it, and it's my Schopen shower. Just wanted to throw that out
It's
there.
nothing better than being watched by a grim-faced philosopher
Oh yeah,
while you're washing your balls.
yes sir,
The world is will and idea. I will washing myself. That's pretty funny.
yes sir.
And how do you? And this is another thing that bothered me about Kant is as you talk about the impenetrability of the text, and it's like if you have a great idea, and this, it goes back to one of the most influential things I ever heard was, that Socrates never used the word epistemology. And Socrates spoke in the sort of plain language of the people and got his ideas across the plain language of the people. And to me, it's like if you have great ideas, then part of your responsibility to those great ideas is to put them forth in a digestible fashion for the common man, especially if you're talking about ethics. Because
I agree.
ethics is something that we have to teach to children. So there has to be something in your ethical system that can be communicated to children. And if you don't, I'm always suspicious of people who don't take the time to express ideas of ethics. I mean, if you're talking about something technical in metaphysics, okay, I get that. We don't teach brain in a tank to 3-year-olds, but we do teach ethics to 2 and 3-year-olds. So you have to find a way to, if you have a great idea, then you have to find a way to communicate it in a manner that people can follow, particularly kids. And the more esoteric the text, the more I'm suspicious about the creation of a mystery religion that requires divine priests of philosophy to interpret it for you. The less accessible the text is to the general population, the more concerned I am about incipient totalitarianism, that only the Pope can talk to God and you have to obey the Pope, and only the philosophy professor can understand Kant and you have to obey the philosophy professor because the text is inaccessible to the gen pop. That's always a bit. My suspicion lens, my spider sense starts tingling in those scenarios.
Yeah, I have 50 pages of notes on Kant, just going through the first and third critiques. I was very diligently going page by page, comparing with the first critique. There's two editions, two versions. There's the A and B versions, and even you have to kind of understand what he is actually meaning by the different faculties of the mind. And it's different in the different versions. So imagination in the A version for Kant is its own faculty, like understanding is its own faculty. But in the B edition, imagination is subordinate to understanding. But when you get to the third critique, um, imagination is also its own faculty again. So, there's Kant is very difficult, and especially when you like
Or just contradictory.
it is like with the different editions, so
So
you have to kind of
contradictory is
sift out.
bad, right? Contradictory in philosophy is bad. If you define things as something in one book and then something else in another book without referencing the change, that's just bad philosophy. I mean, if you tried doing that in a philosophy paper or a philosophy lecture, you'd be rightly called out for, hang on, you changed definitions of terms without even saying why or acknowledging it.
Yeah, so the B edition, I believe he tried to streamline that to make it more accessible, but in doing so, he made imagination subordinate to the understanding. But when you get to the third critique, he positions imagination as its own faculty of the mind again. So I think with the B edition, just because I don't think the critique of pure reason caught on immediately. I think he went in, the revision with the B edition, just to make it more digestible for people. It was just still not digestible at all. Um, but yeah, this is definitely the hardest philosophical text that I have tackled, and
And it
it's
also
great that
troubles me when people talk about ethics and they've never had kids. And the reason being, not that you have to have kids to be a good philosopher, but once you've gone through the process of trying to explain right and wrong, good and bad to children, you realize that you do have to have a moral system that can be explained to children. Otherwise, children simply have to have authority inflicted upon them. I mean, can you imagine? I mean, it would actually be quite a good comedy skit to have a Kantian father attempt to explain Kant's categorical imperative and his critique of pure reason to a 3-year-old who had taken a cookie without permission.
yeah, that's nonsense. No way you can. I don't even think you like Schopenhauer. He does simplify Kant by with the principle of sufficient reason. Every cause, like everything must have a reason, and he does so with time and space being bound by the law of causality, which is a lot more simplistic. That's cause and effect essentially. Um, that's You can explain that to a child, but no, you can't explain, the 12 categories of understanding
Yeah, yeah, good luck.
to
No, I remember with my
the child.
daughter, I gave her a cookie and then I said, "You stole from me," when she was very little. And she said, "I did not steal from you." And I said, "Yes, you did." "Well, why do you think you didn't steal from me?" "Because you gave it to me." And I'm like, "Yeah, okay, so that's you, PP."
Yeah, yeah, there's no way for to communicate that in a digestible, like, way that a child can understand it. I don't think that's possible for Kant, and
Yeah,
that's a really
because
good point.
the other thing too, if moral philosophy is so complicated, how can we hold people in society morally responsible? I mean, if, let's say, you had to have a PhD in physics to be charged with a crime, well, we'd be back to a Hobbesian state of nature, right? Because very few people have PhDs in physics. And so if moral theories are so complicated that you need graduate school studying of Kant's 12 categories or his critique of pure reason, and even then it's still difficult and impenetrable, then what you're saying is that like 99.9999% of humanity has zero moral responsibility because it's too complicated for them to understand. And that to me is like, if you cannot provide a moral theory that, I mean, we could scale down to, I don't know, IQ 70, 75, wherever it is that the cutoff is that people can't really understand cause and effect, but that's a very tiny percentage of the population. So if you can't have a moral theory, I mean, how can you hold children morally responsible if your moral theory is so complex? How the average person, I mean,
Well,
if you have people who've studied Kant for their entire lifetimes who come up with different conclusions, then how can the average person possibly be held morally responsible if
well,
experts with decades of study can't decide on what is right and wrong?
right. And I think Kant makes that admission too, because with the second critique, the critique of practical reason, no, it's different than pure reason. So now, like, there's three metaphysical questions for Kant, and one is, God, the soul, and freedom. With the second, like, that's incompatible with pure reason. It's incompatible with what's in the first critique. But the second critique, the critique of practical reason, he allows for freedom. Like, and then, you know, practical reason is good. Like, it helps us have morals for Kant. So you don't have to understand like the first critique fully to kind of get where Kant's coming from with his morals. But yes, it is it's still very dense stuff, and I don't see a child understanding it sufficiently, at
Well,
least.
even the average adult with an IQ of 80 or 85 is held to be morally responsible. And so the question is, can you explain your moral theory to somebody of below, let's say just a standard deviation below the average, right? Can you explain your moral theory to somebody with an IQ of 85? And such that they can really understand it. If you can't, get it, Kent? If you can't, then that person is not morally responsible because they can't understand ethics. Can you explain your moral theory to a child of 3 or 4, or wherever you would say that children's moral responsibilities would begin? Well, if you can't, then all you can do is bully and punish them and bribe them, which is anti-philosophical. So that to me was the big sort of challenge that I set out for myself was, and I did this very early on in my podcast series called the ABCs of UPP, how to explain UPP to children. And I did it with my own daughter, who's obviously smarter than your average bear, but she got it at about 2.5, I think it was. And that's really the first time I explained it to her. And so all of this esoteric stuff, I mean, Plato's higher realm of forms necessitates the noble lie because you cannot explain it objectively to children or the average person, which means all you can do is order them around and create a mystery religion of those who have the inside scoop on what virtue is, but can never explain it to you in rational terms or terms that the average person or the child can understand. And so all you can do is order them around, which is why these realms, higher realms, always lead to these kinds of totalitarian ideologies.
Yeah, yeah, I can see that. Especially Plato. But for Kant, we see at least I see on social media a lot of like little snippets of this saying from Kant or other philosophers that kind of encapsulate his philosophy about getting really into it. Just certain maxims or whatnot, which I think people innately understand, and also something to consider for Kant. He uses the word rational very specifically, like what separates man from animal. And with the critique of pure reason, what he means by rational is essentially a functional mind. So when you get into, uh, like what you're saying, very, very low IQ people that just can't comprehend, even simplified Kant or, the maxims or whatnot, that is unable to really understand it. Kant would say it doesn't apply to them. Like his philosophy, like
Well, but
He's
then
just
you have to
only
take you. Then you have. But if moral rules don't apply to people and they're not morally responsible, where are they in society?
right.
I mean,
I
are
meant
they
that
out there
like
roaming
my point
around
is
doing whatever they want? And we assume that they would be more violent because they couldn't reason. So, do you allow people out there who you withhold moral responsibility from? Do you just allow them to roam around in society? It seems unlikely because you would never be able to prosecute them for any crimes.
right. I meant that Kant's philosophy is like for the reader, the person to understand it. It's only for functional minds. It's the rational mind. Not
Right, but and the more sorry to interrupt, the more simple you make your moral explanation, the wider the net of freedom you can provide to society. Because if a thorough and deep understanding of Kant was required for moral responsibility, there'd be like 8 people in the world who
well.
could
That's what.
who would have moral
Y-
responsibility. Everybody else would be in an asylum or in some sort of confinement. In the way that
well,
we
yes,
would,
for
somebody
a
who's got
reason.
an IQ of 65 is probably not. I mean, they couldn't function out there in society. They're probably in some kind of home or some sort of place where they can be taken care of. So to simplify and make it easily understandable is a way of extending people's moral freedoms and moral responsibilities. And we want to spread moral responsibilities as wide as possible until it becomes unjust, right? So if somebody's got a really, really low IQ and they just cannot piece together cause and effect, it would be wrong to hold them morally accountable. It would also be wrong to grant them freedom to roam around in society because they wouldn't be able to survive and they would probably turn pretty feral. And so for me, a moralist has to make the moral arguments as clear as possible to as many people as possible, because the more clear it is, the more people it covers, and the more people we can allow to be morally autonomous and independent and responsible. And so making it esoteric to me is limiting it to a sort of mystery religion of
Right.
elites. And
I understand that.
it
Like,
condemns the
there's,
majority of people to have no rational moral responsibility. I'm so sorry. Go ahead.
I understand. Yeah, I understand that. But there's two layers to Kant. We have the pure reason, which is for just the rational minds who can quote unquote understand it, once it's penetrated, and then there's the practical reason, which allows for God, soul, and freedom, and that can he Kant was a champion of that. A lot of people think that he was a Christian because Christianity, has morals and all that. And with the second critique, the practical reason, Kant allows that. Like it's like, yeah, it's not part of pure reason. Um, like reason itself for Kant, which I'm sure you understand. It's just for the listeners out there who may not know. Reason is like when the mind filters the raw sense data that we we filter it into empirical concepts. Reason tries to bring that all into totality, and sometimes reason. This is the issue of metaphysics of this day that he was trying to correct with the critique of pure reason. Is that reason could go out of bounds and say, oh, everything comes from God, then and everything comes from whatnot that may not be part of reason itself. As reason is trying to make complete what it has in knowledge of everything. But practical reason allows for God, soul, and freedom. It allows for the superstition and all that. It's kind of like for the people who are unable to understand, the first critique, um, them having morals from a higher power like the Christian Bible would be good for Kant. Does that make sense?
Well, yeah, I mean, and this certainly accords with, I think, what we were talking about earlier, or what I was talking about earlier, not to put words in your mouth,
Yeah.
which is that if you can't explain your moral theory, you have to rely on rewards and punishments. So he would say, well, my theory of ethics with its 12 categories and blah, 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 that's for the elite, but for everyone else, hell and heaven.
Yeah, you're right. You're right.
And that's the
As
noble lie. That would be Plato's, well, you can't understand this realm of higher forms, so, bribes and punishments.
yeah, yeah, the noble lie of the different metals in our souls.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, Plato's weird. He he wanted to treat comedy seriously. So when he talks about like communal children and all that, and telling them they're all raised, from the earth, and make them more grounded in their republic, he's treating comedy seriously in that aspect. Like, and philosophy should do that. Like philosophy, even what's comical for most people, like having communal children, um, should be seriously thought about. If there's any possible, positive outcomes that might come from that. But yeah, he's I think what he's doing, there's a lot of metaphors and analogies and symbolic aspects to the Republic, and it all revolves around the aspect of harmony. But yeah, that's something that's really out there that everyone kind of raises their eyebrow at in the Republic, is that, you know, Plato advocated for communal children, and
And not knowing your parentage, which means
yes,
that incest would be an inevitable result. And personally, just very brief aside, this may be prejudicial, but because we're all mortal and you only have a certain amount of time to study people, the moment I come across something seriously deranged and obviously wrong in a philosopher, I mean, I don't throw the whole book aside, obviously, because they're still, but it means that they're not systemic. Because if Plato is like, okay, my ideal society is a tyranny and the children don't know who their parents are and they're going to end up with brothers and sisters marrying each other. And if he doesn't sit there and say, okay, something's not right about this, like, I'm promoting incest or the conditions for where incest will be inevitable, something's got to be not particularly right about this. Or when Kant says, yeah, but all moral considerations aside, you have to obey the king no matter what. And it's like, okay, but that's just a recipe for pure subjugation, enslavement, and totalitarianism, and would justify Chairman Mao, Stalin, Hitler, whoever, right? Pol Pot. And so if a philosopher says something clearly wrong, clearly immoral, clearly evil, such as obey the king no matter what, or here's the conditions wherein incest will be an inevitability, and breaking the entire family bonds and so on, I'm like, okay, so if they don't notice they got this wrong completely, what else do they not notice that they got wrong? And it
yes,
would be like, if the first time you use a GPS, it takes you in entirely the wrong direction, are you ever going to trust that GPS again? I mean, I had a phone once with an alternate GPS system. It took me to the wrong place. I never used it again because it's like I now cannot trust the GPS. And so for me, it's not like everyone has to be perfect. Lord knows I'm not either. But in general, it has to be self-correcting, and there has to be a process of rigorously evaluating thought to make sure you don't come up with something crazy. And again, this is another thing that changed my life, which is Aristotle saying, if you come up with some theory of ethics that proves that murder is good, I don't care what you've done something wrong, because that there's a sort of instinct for truth that we have. And if you come up with a system and somebody, I'm sure people at the time said to Plato, this is incest, right? This is just going to promote incest. And if Plato was like, no, I'm still going to stick with it, it's like, maybe you got some other stuff right, but it's mostly accidental, because if you don't have an instinct for truth and just get a feel for when you've gone wrong, like if your theory can be used to prove that murder is good or incest is good or at least not bad, then, I mean, the instinct doesn't prove things, but it is very important that if you do end up with something like that, that you go back and check your logic to see where you went wrong.
no, you're correct to point that out. My interpretation of the Republic is more like a psychology work of psychology, harmonizing the psyche and all that, rather than a political document. Some people would argue that Plato's Politics is actually in his book, The Laws, which I myself have not read very in depth, just kind of skimmed it. But the Republic is it's really an, uh, an example of idealism, and I view it mainly as metaphor and symbolism rather than a concrete political document. But other people, they do, take what he says, verbatim, and they point out,
Well,
like, hey,
they
this is
take what he says. I mean, it's like Thomas More's Utopia, right? I mean, you take what the person says literally. This is my description of an ideal society. Okay, I'm going to assume that you know what you're doing, and this is your description of an ideal society, and then saying, well, no, it's not actually what Plato said he was doing. It's something else completely. I think that's going a bit too far to try and rescue the text from the author's clearly stated goal.
Yeah, I mean, that's an issue a lot of people have with Plato.
Here's my recipe for cheesecake. No, you're really talking about how to organize the human soul. It's like, I'm not sure. I think it's a recipe for cheesecake, if that's what the author does, and all the ingredients are how to make cheesecake. But anyway,
Right.
I mean, I think that's an interesting discussion. But
No, it's
I look for
criticism a
the
lot of people have
outliers.
with
Yeah,
Plato.
I look for the outliers. And if something's really nutty and evil in a philosopher's advocacy, I mean, they're still worth studying. They're still worth, I don't obviously agree with the blonde dominant beast overlord stuff that Nietzsche went on about, but nonetheless, it's still worth reading, and Plato is worth reading. I've got a 4+ hour presentation on Plato at fdrpodcast.com. I've done Aristotle, and of course, I've got the whole History of Philosophers series, which if you are a subscriber, you should check out. I've stopped right before Kant because he's such a giant, jagged pill to swallow sideways that I'm going to need at least a month to refresh my memory on Kant and make, because I don't just evaluate, I provide counter arguments. But yeah, I definitely look for, okay, if there's one wildly nutty thing that's clearly wrong, like even by the standards of the time, then although, I mean, the question of Kant and you should obey the king or the prince or the ruler, no matter what.
Yeah.
Of course.
Duty is the highest good for Kant.
Yes. And of course, the idea that, I mean, it's vaguely Buddhist, right? That if you take any pleasure in your charitable deeds, they're not charitable or good. It has to be something that is either neutral or ideally causes you to suffer. Oh, and I guess
don't write
his
off
moral
your
theory causes grad
philanthropy
students
on
to
your
suffer.
tax
That's only
return.
fair. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, don't write off your philanthropy on your tax returns. You'd be a bad Buddhist if you do that. Get a tax
And
break.
you said you're not sure what you're going to do after this. So you're in a 2-year program, is that right? Do you think you might FUD it up after this?
So I'm actually I'm weighing a few different possibilities. I do miss having income, so I've been living very frugally while doing grad school. I apologize, I'm sick, but there's one university that has a PhD program that it kind of aligns more with my personal philosophy, which is more on the traditional side, and I may apply to that, or I may go back into the workforce. It really depends. I apologize with the
No, that's
coughing.
fine. So, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm gonna finish this semester. The next semester will be my end as a master's student, and I have a 4.0 GPA. We've been doing really well. I've been in journals, um, not big journals or anything, but enough to get some credentials to be a good applicant for a PhD program. But and I did apply to speak at a conference at Yale next year, so waiting for word about that. But yeah, it's working on when I'm do something, I want to do it to the best of my abilities. So even if I don't pursue a PhD, at least as a master's student, did the best I could. But if I do pursue a PhD, it'd be I'd be a solid candidate. But I don't know. Like I said, I miss having steady income. My bachelor's is in business, so after a philosophy degree, I don't have to work in an iPhone store. Um, so yeah, there's not
It's
really
also
much.
really nice. I just wanted to mention it's also really nice to talk to a student of philosophy who's actually worked with his hands and done practical things in the world. Because I could tell, man, I mean, the moment you wanted to come on the show and the moment I heard from you, I'm like, okay, this is a man who's had practical experience doing real things in the real world. Because nothing grows Platonism like a tumor in your brain than only dealing with concepts and not things in the real world. And nothing grounds you in empiricism more than doing real things, hopefully with real consequences in the real world, because you can't manipulate objects in the same way that you can manipulate concepts, and it does give you a lot of grounding. So I was like, pleased to hear that in the moment you spoke. I'm like, and then you started to talk about your time in the army and practical things that you've done and so on. And I can always tell it's like a weird, it's a weird kind of Tourette's that I have, where I'm like a practical man, a practical woman has done real work with their hands, real things, and that conditions the consciousness. And I can always tell the people who've never done very practical work with their hands, particularly with negative consequences, like you get things wrong in the army and people can die. And when I was doing my gold panning and prospecting, and I was using flamethrowers and giant drills, and if you get things wrong, you're going to die because you're like 3 days from a hospital if you're lucky. So, there's
Yeah,
sort of a practicality that comes out of that.
I worked missiles in the Air Force, but um, I actually do like Plato, but like I said, I view it not as law. I view it more as a metaphor, like harmonizing the psyche, than a political document. Like if I were to view like Nietzsche's will to power as the ultimate truth, it's I end up being a fruitcake. But yeah, I appreciate the compliments there, and I appreciate what you're doing, and I'm glad you're uncanceled. But I
To
am
some degree. I mean, it's one platform, but it's better than nothing for sure. I appreciate that.
yeah, I remember watching your videos back in like 2015, 16, and steady rotation on YouTube, and very insightful voice on there. It was sad to see you go. But yeah, it's a great honor to be on your program. Did you have any other questions before we wrap up?
Yeah, if I could just ask one more, and obviously don't talk about anything you're not comfortable with, but you haven't mentioned anything about wife and kids or anything like that. And if you're sailing 40s and thinking of maybe doing a PhD, missing an income, is that something that's part of your life? Are you a bit more monk-like and ascetic? Because you mentioned that a little bit earlier with reference to, was it Schopenhauer or something? But is that something that you're interested in or focused on, or is that part of your life and you just don't want to mention it, which is totally fine too? But where does that realm of life lie for you?
Right. I did have a fiance that fell through because she was a gold digger, and from there, I'm like, well, my master will be
Wait, she was a
well.
gold digger and you don't have an income? So she was a really bad gold digger.
No, I had income back then. I actually had a really nice position, as an
Oh, so
analyst.
you've had the money and given it up.
Yeah, yeah. I'd
Ah,
rather.
okay. That's yeah. So
I've
you
always
mentioned you
wanted
had
to
a
study.
business degree. So sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, yeah. So, yeah, it fell through. Like we're going to do a prenuptial agreement because she
Oh, is
had
that how
some.
you found the gold digger thing? Was in the prenup?
Yeah, she went on a hunger strike for 5 days. I'm like, yeah, this isn't going to work out.
Wait, what?
Yeah, she threw a
You said
tantrum.
I'm going to need a prenup, and she said I'm going to need to not eat now.
No, she agreed to the prenup because she had said some sketchy things, and it raised a red flag. And she agreed to the prenup for us to get married, and then called a lawyer up just to outline what would be in the prenup. Like, I wasn't going to protect everything, so if you get a divorce, you get at least that whatever. But um, she threw a tantrum, started crying on the phone call with the lawyer, and then went on a hunger strike for 5 days. And I'm like, yep, that's it. Goodbye. So,
Well, that
but
is an impressive level of dedication to accessing your money with those, I'm sure, heavily painted nails. Wow. Wow. How long ago was that?
oh, that was 4 years ago. But that was
Wow.
my last effort at settling down. But now it's philosophy and music are my masters.
Oh, come on, man. You can't be ignoring all of those hotties in the philosophy department.
Oh, yeah, right.
Come on, man. Let's look around you. It's like a cheerleader of reason.
Yeah. Well, anyway, I've really enjoyed this conversation, Mr. Molyneux, and glad that you invited me on.
Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate you giving us a view on the inside of the philosophy departments. And I obviously wish you the very best. And I hope that you'll stay in touch. Let me know how things are going.
Will do. Yeah, if you ever want me to come back on, if you want to do another philosophy chat of some kind, I'm on the Twitter, and you have my email. So anyway, it was great chatting with you today.
All right. Thanks, man. All the best. Have a great day.
You too.
Bye.
Bye.